Hey everyone, in this video I'll guide you through the new Dawn of the Infinite Mega Dungeon in patch 10.1.5. I know it can be pretty intimidating to try out a new dungeon, so I tried to do my best and make the guide as clear as possible and explain what the abilities does. Some stuff might change like the tuning and whatnot, and I will make sure to have a pinned comment below if something significant changes. I spent a ton of time on this video, as you will probably notice. I usually don't ask for this at the beginning of the video. I know it always sounds so cliche when people on YouTube does it, but if you could, please give the video a like and comment below, because it apparently helps out a ton when it comes to YouTube. But anyways, let's get into the guide. The tank mechanic is called Chronos here, which deals heavy physical damage and knocks the tank back. It will also apply a debuff called Shared Lifespan, which makes the tank take 200% more damage. However, before the healer can dispel the debuff, they need to heal through an absorb shield the boss puts on the tank. So make sure to heal the tank and then dispel the debuff as soon as possible. When the boss reaches 100% energy, it will cast a spell called Aeon Shatter. This will create two big circles on the ground. The first circle remains in place, but the second circle, where it targets a player with an arrow, can be moved around. After casting the spell, the boss will jump into the air and slam down onto the first circle. Then it will repeat the process and slam into the second circle. When the boss slams on one of the circles, fragments will appear. You simply need to avoid these fragments because they will cause arcane damage and knock you back if you get hit by it. Once the slam happens and the big circle disappears, residue will spawn. This is a smaller circle that needs to be soaked by a player. If nobody soaks it, Residue Blast will happen, inflicting heavy arcane damage to all players and leaving a damage over time effect that deals additional arcane damage every second for 8 seconds. So it's crucial to soak the residue, otherwise it could potentially lead to a wipe. Additionally, the boss will mark every player in the group with a circle and cause withering sand pools to spawn on the ground, just don't stand in it. And yeah, that pretty much covers the first boss. The second boss is called Manifested Timeways, and it's a pretty unique encounter. So the first thing you will notice are these triangle shaped things on the ground. They will be moving around the boss during the whole fight and affect how the boss's abilities work. If you stand in the decaying time triangle, you will take arcane damage but also receive 20% less damage. On the other hand, if you stand in a accelerating time triangle, you will take arcane damage and your movement speed will be increased by 30%. So let's take a look at how the abilities will interact with the triangles. When the boss uses Fragment of Time, you will see a bunch of yellow balls shooting from the boss. If you happen to be standing in the decaying time triangle, you will notice that the whole ability slows down a bit. But if you choose to position yourself in the accelerating time triangle, things kinda speed up instead. So you want to take advantage of the decaying time and use it to dodge the golden yellow balls. The boss will also choose a player to target with Chrono Faded, which will cause arcane damage every 2 seconds for a total of 8 seconds. Now, here's the thing. If you happen to be standing in the accelerating time triangle, the frequency of the damage over time effect will increase. So if you can, try to position yourself in the decaying time triangle instead. When the debuff is about to wear off, you want to be standing in the accelerating time triangle instead. This way you can quickly get rid of the wave that happens when it expires. If you stay in the decaying time triangle when it expires, the wave which will expand from where you stand will happen way slower, and it might get a bit more challenging to touch all the other abilities. So yeah, try to be standing in the accelerating time triangle when it expires. The first tank mechanic is called Unwind. It's a frontal cone attack that the boss will cast twice in a row. If you stand in the decaying time triangle when the first cast happens, you can actually delay the second cast, so try to do that. And the second ability that tank has to be careful about is called Radiant. It basically just requires the tanks to stay in melee range. And yeah, that's all the abilities you need to know about to defeat the boss. Next up we have Blight of Galakrond. The Blight will transfer into a new host at 75 and 40% health and gain new abilities. So let's take a look at those. The boss will create a bunch of swirlies on the ground that you need to avoid. A random player will also get a debuff called Corrosion, and this debuff will cause nature damage upon impact and continue to inflict damage every 1.5 seconds. If you let this debuff expire, it will cause Corrupted Mind, which mind controls you for a whopping 20 seconds. But if you come in contact with somebody else while you have the debuff, it will transfer to them instead. The best strategy is to give the debuff to the tank because it interacts with the boss's frontal ability called Blight Reclamation. It's actually the only way to remove the debuff. So you want the tank to get it, and then you want the tank to stand in front of the boss's ability to get rid of it. Now, during the second phase, you might want to give the debuff to another player before giving it to the tank, because the tank frontal happens a bit later, so keep that in mind. One more thing to watch out for is the Blight seep on the ground the boss leaves behind while moving, just don't step on it. At 75% health, the boss will transfer into a new host and gain one more ability called Necrotic Winds, which are basically winds you gotta avoid. At 40% health, the boss will transfer into 2 new hosts on the ground and gain even more abilities. The first dragon will use a frontal attack called Incinerating Blight Breath, which inflicts fire damage on anyone standing in front of it. It also leaves a harmful damage over time effect that the healers need to watch out for. However, you can actually completely avoid the breath attack because the boss will channel it before using it, giving you plenty of time to move to a safe spot. Additionally, the boss will also spit on a random player, so healers just need to stay alert to prevent anyone from dying. The other dragon will use Necrofrost, which roots players in place, reduces the threat, and deals frost damage every second until the Necrofrost is destroyed. So it's important to switch to the target and nuke it down as soon as possible to free the players. And yeah, that's basically it for Blight of Galakrond. The fourth boss is someone you might recognize. So the goal of this fight is a bit different than usual. Instead of trying to defeat the boss, we want to give Chromie a chance to destroy the powerful relic by causing something called Cataclysmic Obliteration to backfire. When the boss's energy reaches 100%, Chromie will teleport near the boss and activate something called Timeline Transcendence. This will give you a huge boost, increasing your damage, haste, and resource regen rate. The reason why we're getting this extra power is because we need to get the boss's energy down to 0% to trigger the backfire and temporarily stun him so that Chromie can destroy the relic. The way you get his energy down to 0% is by dealing as much damage as possible, so save your cooldowns for when this happens. Healers also gotta watch out because there will be a ton of incoming damage. If you don't manage to bring down the energy to 0% before the cast is finished, you will most likely wipe. But anyways, before he even reaches 100% energy, there's a few other abilities that you need to know about. Whenever the boss casts Pulverizing Exhalation, you want to move out of the big circle below him and move to one of the sides. Then you want to wait for the adds to spawn and kill them ASAP before moving back to the boss. You'll also target a random player with Extinction Blast. It's pretty easy to spot who has it, because they will have a yellow arrow above their head and a huge circle below their feet. You want this player to run to Chromie and stand beneath her shield while she is channeling Timeline Protection. Everyone else just stay away and don't stand inside of the big circle. Now, after each Extinction Blast, the boss will follow up with Stonecracker Barrage. This will spawn 2 circles on the ground, with one being larger than the other. You want the tank to stand in the smallest circle, while the rest of the group stands in the bigger one. The boss will also put a shield on himself, absorbing damage. While this is going on, he will send out waves of Earth Spike in a straight line. You still want to damage the boss, but you also want to dodge the spikes, because if you get hit by one, they will deal damage to you and knock you back. Finally, we have the tank mechanic, which is called Crushing Onslaught. It increases physical damage taken by 20% for 3 seconds, and this effect does stack, so just be careful with it. And yeah, that's all the abilities you need to know about to defeat the boss. Good luck. Moving on, we have Tyr the Infinite Keeper. The tank mechanic is called Titanic Below. It's a frontal cone that deals heavy physical damage and knocks everyone back caught in its path. You will also notice a puddle appear after the hit, so try to avoid standing in it. When Tyr uses Divining Strike, it's important that all players absorb the damage together and share it evenly. If less than 2 players get hit by it, Tyr gains Titanic Empowerment, boosting his damage by 33% for the rest of the fight, so make sure to soak it. Tyr will also use Infinite Annihilation, where he slams the ground in front of him, causing arcane damage to all players. When he hits the ground, golden puddles will appear, and if you stand in one of these puddles, you will take damage. Additionally, Tyr targets 2 players with Spark of Tyr, which deals arcane damage to players within a 4 yards range every few seconds. When the debuff expires or is removed, it will deal damage to the entire group, so consider removing one of the debuffs while allowing the other one to naturally fade away. When Tyr's energy reaches 0%, he begins to siphon the Oath Stone. During this phase, he gains a damage absorb shield that you need to nuke down. The shield will also deal arcane damage every few seconds and knock everyone back. To counter this, collect the golden balls that move from the outer edges of the room towards the O stone. Touching these balls grants a 10% haste and movement buff, which can stack up to 5 times, meaning it's a 50% haste buff, so make sure to get it and then nuke the shield. And then it's basically rinse and repeat until you defeat the boss. Next up we have Morchie. She will use an ability called Sandblast, which are projectiles that hit everyone in its path, so just make sure she's not facing towards the group. She will also use something called More Problems, and just be ready for a bunch of Morchies popping up all over the room. Your task is to find the correct one. Just look for the Morchie without the disguise. Once you've spotted the correct one, make sure to stand beside or behind her, because after a few seconds she will transform into a dragon and use Dragon's Breath, and trust me, you don't want to stand in front of that. She will also spawn time traps on the platform. Stepping into one of those will get you stunned for a whopping 30 seconds, and just to make it a bit more fun, she will spawn clones that will fixate on you right after spawning the traps. So you want to position yourself in a way so the clones walk into one of the traps instead of you. They will then stay stunned until Morchie's next corrupt timeline cast, which will heal them to full and remove the stun. And yeah, that pretty much covers the mechanics of this fight. The Time Lost battlefield is a pretty unique encounter. The Alliance will face Hellscream while the Horde will face Ando and Lothar. The abilities the bosses will use are pretty much the same, but some of the abilities will have different names. In this guide I will show you the Alliance version and mention the Horde abilities if needed. So let's begin and talk about what abilities the boss will use. The boss will leap at a player's location and start using Blade Storm for about 6 seconds while following the player, so just keep running away. The boss will also use Death Wish or Shockwave depending on your faction, and this spell deals damage in a frontal cone 3 times in a row that you need to sidestep. The tank mechanic is called Decapitate or Mortal Strike, and it deals physical damage and applies a debuff that reduces the tank's healing taken for a few seconds. The boss will also summon 3 adds throughout the fight to join the battle. The first add is a warrior that deals some damage, but besides that it has nothing notable to mention. The next type is an axe thrower or an archer that attacks players from range and applies a bleed. And the final add is either a warlock or a conjurer that has an AoE ability that you need to move out of. Just imagine there is a rain of fire in that circle that you see on the screen. The add will also cast Immolate or Fireball and apply the spellable dot. Just make sure to swap to the adds before moving back to the boss so you don't get overwhelmed with too many adds at a time. And yeah, that's pretty much all abilities for the Time Lost battlefield. The final boss of the dungeon is a 2-phase encounter. The second phase starts when the boss reaches 8% health. But first, let's talk about the first phase. The tank mechanic is called Temporal Breath. It's a frontal that deals arcane damage and puts a 9-second damage over time effect on everyone standing in front of it. You will also notice infinity orbs spawn on the ground. If a player stands within one of these circles, the orb will fall slower to the ground, and once it reaches the ground, it will deal arcane damage to all players and increase the damage done from the next orb by 300% for 4 seconds, so you don't want 2 orbs to reach the ground at the same time. Throughout the first phase, the boss will also summon Infinity Keepers who will channel portals that you need to close by defeating the Keepers. Every Keeper you kill will inflict 20% of the boss's HP over 4 seconds. The first add is called Infinity Keeper, and they will keep spam casting Infinity Blast. This spell can be interrupted, so it might be worth interrupting every now and then. Every 10 seconds, timed placed troopers will spawn from the portals and help the Keepers. Just nuke them down ASAP because they don't do anything special. After 4 Keepers has been summoned, the boss will fly up into the sky and continue to cast Infinity Orbs. When the boss reaches 20% health, he will land on the ground once again, and once you get him to 8% health, the second phase will begin. During this phase, the boss will use a new ability called Infinity Corruption. This will create a bunch of swirlies on the ground that will create puddles that deals arcane damage if you stand in them. The puddles do last for a few minutes, so you want to kite the boss around the room and avoid the swirlies on the ground, because they do a lot of damage. During this phase, the boss will still use the breath and the Infinity Orbs, so just keep that in mind. And yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. I really tried my best to make it as clear as possible, because I know it can sometimes be pretty intimidating going into a new mythic dungeon. But anyways, if you enjoyed it, then please leave a like on the video and leave a comment as well, because it really helps with the algorithm. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.